I'm Jessie Cortez. For 8 years, I lived under a name that wasn't mine, in a city I never chose, protecting a secret that could get me killed. Then my parents found me. They sat in my kitchen, tears streaming down their faces, begging me to sign papers that would strip away every protection the U.S. Marshals had given me. They said it was the only way to save our family. So I signed. 3 days later, I was running for my life again, and when I called them, gasping and terrified, my mother's voice was ice cold. "We got what we needed, Jessica. You're on your own. Now?" That was the moment I realized my own parents had sold me out. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the exact moment my childhood ended. I was 16, walking home from my part-time job at the Corner Mart in Riverside, California. The sun was setting, painting the sky in those perfect orange and pink streaks that made our neighborhood look better than it actually was. I had my earbuds in, humming along to some song I can't even remember now, when I heard the shouting from the warehouse on Elm Street. Most people would have kept walking. Most smart people would have minded their own business. But I've always been curious, maybe too curious for my own good. I crept closer to the chain-link fence, peering through a gap where someone had cut the metal years ago. What I saw inside changed everything. 3 men in expensive suits stood around a 4th man who was tied to a chair, blood streaming down his face. The one doing the talking had silver hair and a voice like gravel. He was asking questions about money, about shipments, about people I'd never heard of. When the tied-up man stopped answering, Silver Hair nodded to one of the others, who pulled out a gun and put it to the man's head. I should have run then. Instead, I fumbled for my phone, trying to record what was happening. The camera flash went off. In that split second of white light, Silver Hair's eyes met mine through the fence. Time stopped. Then everything happened at once. Shouting, running footsteps, the sound of bullets hitting the fence behind me as I sprinted through the industrial district like my life depended on it, because it did. I made it home somehow, burst through our front door where my parents, Linda and Robert Cortez, were watching the evening news. My dad worked construction. My mom cleaned houses for wealthy families in the hills. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Or at least I thought we were. I was babbling about what I'd seen, about the men and the gun, and how they'd seen me too. My parents exchanged a look I didn't understand then but would replay in my mind for years afterward. Something passed between them, something that felt like fear mixed with something else I couldn't name. Within 6 hours, there were federal agents at our door. Agent Sarah Thompson was tall, serious, with kind eyes that didn't match her no-nonsense attitude. She explained that I'd witnessed members of the Valdez crime family eliminating a witness who'd been set to testify against them. The man I'd seen die had been under federal protection, just like I would need to be. The Valdez family had connections. Everywhere, she said. Police departments, judges, even some federal agencies. If they identified me, I'd be dead within a week. My parents cried when Agent Thompson explained the witness protection program. I would need to disappear completely. New name, new city, new life. No contact with family or friends until the trial was over and the major players were behind bars. It could take years, she warned, maybe longer. My mother, Linda, held my hand so tightly it hurt. My father, Robert, kept asking if there was any other way, if maybe we could all go together. Agent Thompson shook her head. The program only protected direct witnesses and their immediate spouses and minor children. Since I was 16, I qualified on my own, but my parents and my siblings, Maria and Danny, would have to stay behind. The last night in my childhood, bedroom, I lay awake staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling when I was 10. Maria, who was 14 then, climbed into bed with me like she used to do during thunderstorms. Danny, only 12, sat on the floor playing with his action figures, trying to pretend everything was normal. None of us really understood what was happening. How could we? I was just a kid who'd seen something I shouldn't have seen. And now, I was about to become someone else entirely. Agent Thompson picked me up at dawn. One suitcase, that was all I could take. My parents stood on the front porch waving goodbye, and I pressed my face to the back window of the black sedan until our little yellow house disappeared around the corner. I didn't know it then, but I wouldn't see them again for 8 years. Portland, Oregon became my new home. Jessica Martinez became my new name. Agent Thompson set me up in a small apartment downtown with a view of nothing special, enrolled me in Wilson High School where I knew nobody and nobody knew me. She gave me a new social security number, a new birth certificate, a new everything. The story was simple. I was Jessica Martinez from San Diego, living with my aunt while my parents dealt with some family issues. Don't volunteer information, she told me. Don't get too close to anyone. Don't trust easily. Blend in, graduate, go to college if I wanted. But always remember that my real life was on hold until the people who wanted me dead were safely locked away. High school as Jessica Martinez was lonely in ways I hadn't expected. I made a few friends, casual ones, the kind you eat lunch with but never invite over because you can't explain why your apartment is so empty, why you have no family photos, why you sometimes forget to respond to your fake name. I got good grades because studying was easier than socializing. I worked part-time at a bookstore because books didn't ask questions about your past. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was kind to me in the way older women are kind to young people they sense are adrift. She never pried, never pushed, just made sure I had enough hours to pay my bills and sometimes brought me homemade soup when she noticed I looked thinner than usual. College was Portland State University, where I studied psychology because I'd become fascinated by the way people created and maintained false identities, the way trauma could reshape someone's entire sense of self. I wasn't trying to be ironic. I genuinely wanted to understand what was happening to me, why I sometimes forgot which stories were real and which were cover, why I felt like I was living someone else's life even though Jessica Martinez was supposedly me. Agent Thompson checked in every few months. The trial had been delayed. The defense was filing appeals. New evidence had surfaced that required additional investigation. The Valdez family was still active, still dangerous. I needed to stay Jessica Martinez a little longer. Then a little longer became a lot longer. High school graduation as Jessica Martinez. College graduation as Jessica Martinez. My first real job at a community mental health center as Jessica Martinez. A small promotion, my own apartment with actual furniture instead of the basic setup the Marshals had provided. Years of birthdays celebrated alone. Holidays spent working overtime because Jessica Martinez didn't have family to visit. But I did have family. Somewhere in California, Linda and Robert and Maria and Danny Cortez were living their lives without me. I wondered if they thought about me, if they missed me, if they even remembered what I looked like. Agent Thompson had warned me against any contact, but sometimes I'd find myself on social media, searching for their names, desperate for some glimpse of the life I'd left behind. I never found much. My parents weren't social media people, and my siblings used privacy settings that kept their lives hidden from strangers, which is what I was now, I suppose, a stranger. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The nightmares started in my 3rd year of college. Not about the warehouse or the murder I'd witnessed, but about forgetting. In the dreams, I'd run into my family on the street, and they wouldn't recognize me. Or worse, I wouldn't recognize them. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, grabbing for my original birth certificate, the one document Agent Thompson had let me keep locked in a safety deposit box. Jessie Cortez, born April 15, 1995, in Riverside, California, daughter of Linda and Robert, sister to Maria and Danny. I'd repeat it like a mantra until my heart stopped racing. By my mid-20s, Jessica Martinez felt more real than Jessie Cortez ever had. I had a career I cared about, helping people process trauma and rebuild their lives. I had a small circle of friends who knew me as the slightly mysterious woman, who was good in a crisis but never talked about her family. I had routines, favorite restaurants, a gym membership, a life that looked normal from the outside. But at night, alone in my apartment, I'd sometimes catch myself in the mirror and feel like I was looking at a stranger. Agent Thompson's visits became less frequent. The case was still active, she assured me, but these things took time. The important thing was that I was safe, that the program was working. Did I need anything? Was I managing okay? I always said yes, because what else could I say? That I felt like I was disappearing into my own cover story? That sometimes I couldn't remember my mother's voice or my father's laugh? That I was starting to forget what it felt like to be loved by people who'd known me before I became someone else? Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, 8 years after I'd become Jessica Martinez, my phone rang. The number was local, Portland area code, but I didn't recognize it. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Jessie? The voice was older, shakier than I remembered, but unmistakably familiar. My coffee mug hit the floor, shattering, on the kitchen tiles. Mom? The conversation that followed was a blur of tears and apologies and desperate explanations. They'd found me, my family had found me, after 8 years of searching and hiring private investigators and following every lead that went nowhere. My sister Maria, now 22, had become obsessed with finding me. She'd learned to use computers, to search databases, to track down every Jessica Martinez in the Pacific Northwest, until she found one whose age and background matched what I might have become. They were in trouble, my mother explained through her tears. Real trouble. My father had gotten involved with the wrong people, borrowed money from loan sharks to keep his construction business afloat during the recession. The debt had spiraled. And now these men were threatening not just him, but Maria and Danny too. They needed money, a lot of money, more than they could ever hope to earn or borrow legitimately. But they'd learned something about witness protection, about how people in the program sometimes received financial assistance, how their new identities came with benefits, resources, even bank accounts that could be accessed in emergencies. "We know you can't come home yet," my mother said, her voice breaking. "We understand that, but maybe there's a way you can help us from where you are. Maybe there are things you can access that we can't. We're desperate, mija. They're going to hurt Danny." My little brother Danny was 20 now, but in my mind he was still 12 years old, still playing with action figures on my bedroom floor the night before I disappeared. The thought of anyone hurting him made something fierce and protective surge up in my chest. Of course I would help. Of course I would do whatever it took to keep my family safe, even if it meant risking everything I'd built as Jessica Martinez. They drove up from California that weekend. I hadn't seen them in 8 years, but I would have recognized them anywhere. My father's hair was completely gray now, and he moved like someone carrying a heavy weight. My mother looked smaller, more fragile, but her eyes were the same warm brown I remembered. Maria had grown into a beautiful young woman, and Danny was taller than my father, though he still had that sweet, slightly goofy smile that had made him my favorite when we were kids. We met at a small diner outside the city, the kind of place where the waitresses call you honey and the coffee tastes like it's been sitting on the burner all day. For the first hour, we just cried and caught up and marveled at how different we all looked. I told them about Jessica Martinez's life, about college and my job, and the strange experience of living under someone else's name. They told me about the years after I left, how they'd struggled with not knowing if I was safe, if I was happy, if I was even alive. But eventually, the conversation turned to why they'd come. The debt was over $200,000 now, my father explained, his hands shaking as he spoke. The interest kept compounding, and the threats were getting more specific. Just last week, someone had followed Maria home from work. Danny had found his car tires slashed. They'd tried everything legal, talked to police, considered bankruptcy, but the men they owed weren't the kind who cared about legal remedies. "We've been researching the Witness Protection Program," Maria said, pulling out a folder thick with printed articles and government documents. "We know there are emergency provisions, ways to access funds or relocate people who are in immediate danger. We know you probably have resources we don't know about, accounts or contacts or ways to get help quickly." I stared at the documents, my heart sinking. They thought Jessica Martinez was wealthy, that being in witness protection came with some kind of financial safety net. The truth was, I lived paycheck to paycheck just like most people. The Marshals had set me up with basic housing and helped me get started, but after that, I was on my own. I had maybe $3,000 in savings and a credit card I tried not to use. "There might be a way," my mother said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "We've talked to someone, a lawyer who specializes in these situations. He says if you were to voluntarily leave the program, if you were to sign certain documents, there could be compensation. Money to help you start over somewhere else. Money that could help all of us get free of this mess." The papers they showed me were complex, full of legal language I didn't fully understand. But the basic idea was simple. I would formally request to leave witness protection, stating that I no longer felt I was in danger and wanted to resume my normal life. In exchange, there would be a financial settlement, compensation for the years I'd spent in the program, money that could solve my family's problems and give me a fresh start somewhere new. "It's not permanent," my father assured me. "Once we pay off the debt, once this is all resolved, you could apply to go back into protection if you needed to. This lawyer, he says it happens all the time. People leave the program, realize they'd made a mistake, and get help again." I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that there was a simple solution that would save my family and give me back the life I'd lost. But something felt wrong about the whole thing. The lawyer they'd consulted wouldn't speak to me directly. The documents looked official but didn't have the kind of seals or letterheads I'd expected from federal paperwork. And when I asked to speak to Agent Thompson before signing anything, my parents became agitated, insistent that time was running out, that the people they owed wouldn't wait much longer. "Please, Jessie," Danny said, and hearing my real name from his lips after 8 years of being Jessica made my chest tight. "I'm scared. We're all scared. You're the only one who can help us." So I signed. I signed because I was 24 years old, and I'd been isolated from my family for 8 years, and I loved them more than I loved my own safety. I signed because the idea of being Jessie Cortez again, of having a family again, felt worth any risk. I signed because they were crying and desperate, and I'd been trained my whole life to fix things, to help people, to sacrifice my own needs for the people I loved. The documents went to the lawyer, who promised everything would be processed quickly. My family drove back to California with copies of my signature, promises that the money would be available within days, that their nightmare would soon be over. I went back to my apartment, to my job as Jessica Martinez, and waited for Agent Thompson to call with questions about my request to leave protection. She never called. 3 days later, I was leaving work when I noticed the car. Black sedan, tinted windows, parked across the street from the mental health center where I worked. When I walked to my car, it followed me. When I stopped at a traffic light, I could see the driver's silhouette, and something about it made my blood run cold. I drove straight to the police station, parked in the visitor lot, and waited. The sedan drove past slowly, then disappeared around the corner. I sat there for an hour, feeling paranoid and stupid, before finally driving home. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Every car that passed on the street below seemed to slow down just a little too much. The next morning, there were roses on my doorstep. Beautiful red roses with a card that said, "We've missed you, Jessica. Looking forward to seeing you soon. No signature, no return address. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that my cover had been blown. I called my parents, hands shaking as I dialed the number. My mother answered, and before I could speak, I heard voices in the background, men's voices, speaking Spanish in low, urgent tones. "Mom," I whispered, "something's wrong. I think they found me. I think someone knows who I am." There was a long pause, then my mother's voice, cold and flat in a way I'd never heard before. "We got what we needed, Jessica. You're on your own now." The line went dead. I tried calling back, but the number was disconnected. I tried Maria's phone, Danny's phone, even tried calling my father's construction company. Nothing. It was like my family had vanished all over again, but this time, they'd taken my safety with them. I stood in my kitchen holding the dead phone, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. The roses sat on my counter, their sweet smell now nauseating, like flowers at a funeral. My own funeral, maybe. I kept replaying my mother's words, trying to find some other meaning in them, some explanation that didn't involve my own family selling me out. But the coldness in her voice, the finality of it, left no room for doubt. The first thing I did was call Agent Thompson. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried the main Marshals office, gave them my case number, my real name, my cover name. The woman on the other end put me on hold for what felt like hours. When she came back, her voice was confused. "Ma'am, I'm not showing any active cases under either of those names. Are you sure you have the right office?" "I've been in witness protection for 8 years, I said, my voice getting higher with panic. "Agent Sarah Thompson has been my handler. Case number WP4471-2015. Check again." Another hold. More elevator music. Then, "Ma'am, I'm going to transfer you to my supervisor." The supervisor was a man with a gravelly voice who sounded like he'd been doing this job too long. He asked me the same questions, made me repeat the same information. Then he said something that made my blood turn to ice. "Miss Martinez, according to our records, you voluntarily terminated your participation in the Witness Security Program 3 days ago. The paperwork was filed by your attorney, everything properly notarized and witnessed. As of 72 hours ago, you are no longer under federal protection." "That's impossible," I whispered. "I never filed anything. I never talked to any attorney." "Ma'am, I'm looking at your signature right here. Jessica Martinez, requesting immediate termination of services and forfeiture of all future protection rights. It's all in order." My signature. The documents my family had brought me, the ones I'd signed to help them get money to pay off their debts. I'd signed away my own life without even knowing it. "Can I get back in?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Can I reapply? The people who wanted me dead, they've found me. I'm not safe." The supervisor's voice softened slightly. "Miss Martinez, I'm sorry, but re-entry into the program requires extraordinary circumstances and approval from multiple departments. The process can take months, sometimes years. And frankly, once someone has voluntarily terminated, especially citing that they no longer felt threatened, it's very difficult to prove renewed danger." I hung up and immediately started packing. One suitcase just like 8 years ago, except this time no one was coming to help me disappear. This time I was on my own. I threw in clothes, my laptop, the few documents I had proving Jessica Martinez existed. I left everything else. The furniture, the books, the little life I'd built in Portland. None of it mattered if I was dead. But where could I go? Jessica Martinez had a credit card with a $3,000 limit, a checking account with maybe $2,000, and a job history that wouldn't transfer easily to another state. I had no family I could trust, apparently, no friends close enough to put their own lives at risk. For 8 years, I'd been careful not to get too close to anyone. Now I was paying the price for that isolation. I drove south, staying off the highways, stopping only for gas and cheap food. I paid for everything in cash, turned off my phone, and tried to think like the scared 16-year-old girl who'd first learned what it meant to run for her life. But I wasn't 16 anymore. I was 24, and I'd gotten soft living as Jessica Martinez. I'd forgotten how to look over my shoulder constantly, how to sleep with one eye open, how to trust absolutely no one. The first motel I stopped at was outside Salem, Oregon, a dingy place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions as long as you paid in advance. The clerk barely looked up from his magazine when I handed him $40 for one night. The room smelled like cigarettes and bleach, but it had a working lock and curtains thick enough to hide behind. I sat on the edge of the scratchy bedspread and tried to make sense of what had happened. My family had found me after 8 years of searching. They'd claimed they were in debt, in danger, desperate for help. They'd brought me documents that seemed official, convinced me to sign papers that would supposedly get them money to pay off loan sharks. But instead of helping them, I'd apparently signed myself out of witness protection. And now my mother's voice, cold as winter, telling me I was on my own. Had they been working with the Valdez family all along? Had the debt story been a lie designed to get me to sign those papers? Or had they really been desperate, and when someone offered them money to deliver me, they'd taken it? I didn't know which possibility was worse. I turned my phone back on long enough to check for messages. There were 17 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and one text message from a number with a California area code. All it said was, "We know where you are, Jessica. Running just makes it more fun." I threw the phone across the room, watching it hit the wall and break into pieces. Then I sat on the floor and cried for the first time since I was 16 years old. Not just for my situation, but for the loss of the family I'd thought I had. For 8 years, I'd held on to the idea that somewhere in California, people loved me enough to wait for me. People who would welcome me back when it was safe, who would help me piece together the girl I'd been before I became Jessica Martinez. But those people, if they'd ever really existed, were gone. In their place were strangers who'd traded my life for whatever the Valdez family had offered them. Money, probably. Maybe protection for themselves. Maybe just the promise that if they delivered me, their own lives would be spared. The next morning, I dyed my hair black in the motel bathroom sink, using a box of color I'd bought at a 24-hour pharmacy. Brown eyes, black hair, tan skin, I couldn't change. I looked enough like my old self that anyone with a good photo could still recognize me, but it was better than nothing. I bought cheap sunglasses, a baseball cap, clothes from a thrift store that made me look like a different kind of person than Jessica Martinez had been. For 3 days, I moved from motel to motel, always south, always inland, away from the coast where I figured they'd expect me to run. I was trying to get to Denver, for no better reason than it was far away and I'd never been there. Jessica Martinez had no connections to Colorado, no digital footprint that would lead anyone there. Maybe I could disappear again, start over again, become someone new again. But I was running out of money fast. Motels, even cheap ones, added up quickly. Gas was expensive, food was expensive. Everything was expensive when you were paying cash and couldn't use credit cards or bank accounts that could be traced. By the time I reached the Nevada border, I had less than $300 left. That's when I stopped at a truck stop outside Reno and called the one person I thought might help me. Mrs. Chen, the woman who'd owned the bookstore where I'd worked during college. She'd always been kind to me, always seemed to understand that I was carrying some kind of burden I couldn't talk about. If anyone would help Jessica Martinez disappear without asking too many questions, it might be her. Her voice when she answered was warm and familiar, like stepping into a heated room after hours in the cold. "Jessica, honey, where are you?" "There. Were men at the store asking about you, showing your picture around. I told them I hadn't seen you in months, but they didn't seem to believe me. My heart sank. They were already in Portland, already tracking down everyone Jessica Martinez had ever known. Mrs. Chen, I can't explain everything, but I'm in serious trouble. I need to disappear, and I don't have anyone else to call. There was a long pause. Then, how much trouble, honey? The kind where people die. Another pause. Mrs. Chen had fled Vietnam as a young woman, had probably seen enough violence and chaos to recognize the real thing when she heard it. Where are you? Nevada, Reno area. I'm trying to get to Colorado, but I'm almost out of money. There's a Western Union office on 4th Street downtown. I'm sending you $500 under the name Jennifer Park. Can you remember that? Jennifer Park. I felt tears starting again. Mrs. Chen, I can't pay you back. I don't even know if I'll survive long enough to try. You pay me back by staying alive, Jessica. Whatever your real name is, whoever you really are, you pay me back by making it through this and finding a way to be happy someday. The money was there within 2 hours, just like she'd promised. $500 that felt like a fortune. Enough to get me to Denver and maybe survive for a few weeks while I figured out what to do next. I wanted to call her back, to thank her properly, but I knew that every call I made put her in more danger. The men looking for me wouldn't hesitate to hurt an elderly woman if they thought she was helping me. Denver was gray and cold when I arrived, snow threatening in clouds that hung low over the mountains. I found another cheap motel, this one, on the outskirts of the city where the buildings were low and spread out, and it was easy to see who was coming and going. I paid for a week in advance, gave the name Jennifer Park, and tried to figure out how to become someone else for the 3rd time in my life. The local library became my office. Free internet, warm building, lots of exits, and the kind of place where someone sitting quietly with a laptop didn't attract attention. I researched everything I could about creating new identities, about living off the grid, about disappearing in plain sight. Most of the information was either illegal or required. Resources I didn't have? Getting a fake social security number meant finding criminals who specialized in identity theft. Getting fake documents meant having connections I'd never developed. Getting a job without proper identification meant working for cash-in places. That didn't ask questions, the kind of places where women like me often ended up hurt or worse. But I also researched the Valdez family, using search engines and newspaper archives to learn everything I could about the people who wanted me dead. What I found was worse than I'd expected. In the 8 years since I'd witnessed that murder, the family had grown more powerful, not less. The man I'd seen killed had been just one of dozens of witnesses who'd died before they could testify. The case I'd been supposed to help with had fallen apart completely when other witnesses disappeared or recanted their statements. The Valdez family was still operating, still killing people, still buying their way out of any real consequences. And now they knew exactly where I was. Or at least, they knew where I'd been. The roses on my doorstep, the men asking questions at Mrs. Chen's bookstore, the text message about running being more fun. They weren't just looking for me. They were playing with me. I was reading about witness protection failures in a back corner of the library when someone sat down at the table across from me. A woman, maybe 40 years old, with short brown hair and sharp eyes that reminded me of Agent Thompson. She was dressed like a soccer mom, unremarkable in every way except for the intensity of her gaze. "Jessica Martinez," she said quietly, not quite a question. I tensed, ready to run, but she held up one hand in a calming gesture. Or should I say Jessie Cortez? "My name is Rachel Santos. I'm a private investigator, and I've been looking for you for quite a while." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, closing my laptop and preparing to bolt. "Your family hired me," she said, and something in my chest clenched. "About 6 months ago. They said their daughter had been in witness protection, that they were worried about her safety, that they wanted to find her and help her." They paid me quite a bit of money to track down Jessica Martinez. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. You found me for them. I found you, she said. But I didn't give them the information. Why not? Rachel Santos leaned back in her chair, studying my face. Because something about their story didn't add up. Parents who love their daughter and want to help her don't usually hire someone like me to find her. They call the U.S. Marshals. They work with law enforcement. They don't pay cash to a private investigator who specializes in skip traces and missing persons cases. Then why are you here? Because 3 days ago, I got a very interesting phone call. Someone claiming to be your sister, Maria Cortez, telling me that my services were no longer needed, that the family had found you on their own. She wanted to know if I'd shared your information with anyone else, if I'd kept copies of my research. When I told her that my files were confidential, she offered me $10,000 to destroy everything I'd found and forget I'd ever heard the name Cortez. My blood turned cold. Did you take it? No, Rachel said, because that same day, I saw a news report about a young woman named Jessica Martinez who'd been found dead in her Portland apartment. A parent home invasion. Very violent, very personal. I felt the world tilt sideways. That's impossible. I'm Jessica Martinez. You were Jessica Martinez, Rachel corrected. But someone else is dead wearing your name. Someone with the same build, same general appearance. Someone who was made to look like you after the fact. The Portland police think they found you, Jessie. As far as anyone knows, Jessica Martinez is dead, and her killer was never caught. I couldn't breathe. Someone else had died in my place, in my apartment, in the life I'd built for 8 years. Someone had been murdered so that the world would think I was already dead, so that no one would come looking for the real me. Who was she? I whispered. I don't know yet, Rachel said. The body was too damaged for immediate identification. But someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure she'd be found and identified as you. Your wallet was there, your identification, even your work badge from the mental health center. My family, I said, the words tasting like poison. They set this up. Maybe, Rachel said. Or maybe they're victims too. Maybe whoever's really behind this used them to get to you, then cleaned up loose ends. Either way, you're in serious danger, and you can't handle this alone. I wanted to trust her. I was so tired of being alone, so desperate for someone to help me make sense of what was happening. But I'd trusted my family, and look where that had gotten me. Why should I believe you? I asked. Rachel pulled out her phone, showed me a photo of a driver's license. Jessica Martinez with my address, my date of birth, my photo. But it wasn't my driver's license. The picture was similar enough to fool a casual observer, but it wasn't me. Because I have a copy of the real Jessica Martinez's identification, she said, the one that was found with the body, and because I've been investigating your family for 6 months, and I know they're not who they claimed to be when they hired me. What do you mean? I mean Linda and Robert Cortez filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago. Their construction business failed, just like they told you. But they didn't owe money to loan sharks. They owed money to the IRS, to former employees, to legitimate creditors who were going through the courts. There were no threats, no violence, no reason for them to be desperate enough to sell out their own daughter. I felt sick. Then why? Money, Rachel said simply. A lot of money. Enough to not just pay off their debts, but to disappear themselves if they needed to. The Valdez family has been looking for you for 8 years, and they were willing to pay handsomely for information about your whereabouts. Your family took that deal. But I'm their daughter, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. You were their daughter, Rachel said gently. But you've been gone for 8 years. To them, you became an idea, a memory, maybe even a source of resentment. Kids who disappear into witness protection don't usually come back. Families move on, start over, convince themselves that their missing loved one is probably dead anyway. It's easier than living with the uncertainty. I thought about the way my mother had spoken to me on the phone, the coldness in her voice, when she'd said I was on my own. Maybe she'd already grieved for me years ago. Maybe when the Valdez family approached them with an offer, it felt less like betraying their daughter and more like making a profit off someone who was already gone. "What do I do now?" I asked. "You disappear," Rachel said. "Really disappear, not just change your name and hope for the best. You become someone who never existed, someone with no connection to Jessie Cortez or Jessica Martinez or anyone else you've ever been. And you do it fast, because sooner or later someone's going to figure out that the wrong person died in that Portland apartment. I don't have the money for that kind of disappearing." "You do now," Rachel said, sliding an envelope across the table. "Your family paid me $20,000 to find you. I'm returning their money with interest. Call it severance pay for the daughter they sold." I stared at the envelope, afraid to open it. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I have a daughter," Rachel said. "She's 16, same age you were when this whole nightmare started. If she ever needed to disappear, if she ever needed someone to help her when her own family couldn't or wouldn't, I hope there'd be someone like me willing to step up." She stood to leave, then turned back. "One more thing. The roses that were left on your doorstep in Portland? They're from a florist in Phoenix, Arizona. Same city where your family lives. Make of that what you will." After she was gone, I sat in the library for hours, staring at the envelope and trying to decide what to do. Inside was more money than Jessica Martinez had ever seen at one time. Enough to disappear properly, to buy the kind of new identity that might actually keep me safe. But it also meant accepting that my family had really betrayed me. That the people I'd loved and missed for 8 years had sold me out for cash. Eventually, I opened the envelope. $25,000 in hundreds, clean and untraceable. More than enough to start over, to become someone new, to finally stop running and start living. But first, I had to decide who I wanted to be. The woman at the next table was helping her teenage daughter with homework, geometry or trigonometry, something with triangles and angles. The daughter was frustrated, pencil eraser worn down to nothing, pages full of crossouts and false starts. But her mother was patient, explaining each step over and over until suddenly the girl's face lit up with understanding. "I get it now," the girl said. "You just have to work backwards from what you know to figure out what you don't know." Work backwards from what you know. The phrase stuck with me as I left the library and walked through downtown Denver. Snow, finally starting to fall in soft, fat flakes that melted the moment they hit the sidewalk. What did I know? I knew that my family had betrayed me. I knew that someone had died in my place. I knew that the Valdez family was still looking for me, still wanted me dead after 8 years. I knew that I couldn't trust law enforcement, couldn't trust the witness protection program, couldn't trust anyone except myself. But I also knew something else. I knew that for 8 years, I'd lived as Jessica Martinez, and Jessica Martinez had built a life worth protecting. She'd helped people, had friends, had made a difference in the world, even if it was small. She'd been a good person, someone worth mourning, someone whose death should matter. The woman who'd died in my apartment, whoever she was, deserved justice. Jessica Martinez deserved to be remembered for who she really was, not as a victim of violence. And Jessie Cortez, the 16-year-old girl who'd witnessed a murder and tried to do the right thing, deserved a chance to reclaim her life. I wasn't going to run anymore. I was going to work backwards from what I knew, and I was going to figure out how to fight back. But first, I needed to become someone who could fight and win. Someone who understood how the game was really played, who could move in the shadows without being seen, who could gather information and resources and allies without exposing herself. I needed to become someone who could take on the Valdez family and my own family and anyone else who'd profited from my disappearance. I needed to become someone dangerous. The next morning, I walked into a pawn shop in a rough part of town and bought a cheap laptop with cash. Then I found an internet cafe that didn't ask for identification and started my real education. Not in psychology or social work, but in the darker arts that might actually keep me alive. Computer hacking, financial fraud, identity theft, surveillance techniques. All the things that law-abiding Jessica Martinez would never have learned, but that the new me would need to master. I also started researching my own family more carefully, using techniques I learned from online forums and darknet sites that Rachel Santos had probably never heard of. Public records, social media deep dives, financial databases that weren't supposed to be accessible to civilians. What I found made me realize that I'd never really known my family at all. Robert Cortez, my father, had been in debt long before I'd entered witness protection. Not to loan sharks like he'd claimed, but to legitimate creditors who'd been pursuing him through the courts for years. He'd started 3 different construction companies since I'd been gone, each one failing faster than the last. He'd borrowed money against properties he didn't own, taken out credit cards in other people's names, even filed fraudulent insurance claims on equipment that had never been stolen. Linda Cortez, my mother, had been working for a house cleaning service that catered to wealthy clients in Phoenix and Scottsdale. But according to online reviews and Better Business Bureau complaints, she'd been fired 6 months ago for theft. Small things at first, jewelry and cash that clients claimed had gone missing after she'd cleaned their homes. Then bigger things, like electronics and art that disappeared while she had access to their houses. Maria, my sister, was 22 and should have been in college, but had no educational records I could find. Instead, she'd been arrested twice for credit card fraud and once for identity theft, though all charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence. She was currently unemployed, but living in an apartment that cost more than most people made in a month. Danny, my little brother, was enrolled in Arizona State University, but his tuition was being paid by a scholarship fund that didn't seem to exist. When I traced the funding source, it led back to a shell company that was owned by another shell company that was owned by a trust that had no listed beneficiaries. My family weren't victims. They were criminals. People who'd been living off fraud and theft for years before the Valdez family ever approached them. When someone offered them money to betray me, they'd taken it not because they were desperate, but because they were greedy. That hurt more than anything else they'd done to me. I could have understood desperation, could have forgiven fear for their own lives. But this was just business to them, just another score in a long series of cons and schemes. I'd spent 8 years missing them, loving them, dreaming about the day I could see them again. And they'd spent 8 years forgetting I existed until someone offered to pay them to remember. The snow was falling harder now, covering Denver in a clean white blanket that made everything look new and pure. I walked back to my motel through the quiet streets, past families building snowmen in their front yards, past couples holding hands and laughing as they slipped on the icy sidewalks. Normal people living normal lives, people who didn't have to worry about being hunted by criminals or betrayed by their own families. I envied them, but I also realized that I didn't want to be them anymore. I'd spent 8 years trying to be normal, trying to blend in and disappear and live a quiet life that wouldn't attract attention. But normal people were vulnerable. Normal people trusted the wrong people and got hurt by the people who were supposed to love them. I didn't want to be vulnerable anymore. I wanted to be the kind of person who couldn't be betrayed, because she never trusted anyone in the first place. The kind of person who couldn't be hunted because she was always 3 steps ahead of the hunters. The kind of person who didn't need witness protection because she was scarier than the people who wanted her dead. In my motel room, I opened my new laptop and started planning. Not my escape this time, but my return. I was going back to Phoenix, back to my family, back to the people who'd sold me out. But I wasn't going back as Jessie Cortez or Jessica Martinez. I was going back as someone new, someone they wouldn't recognize until it was too late, someone who was going to make them pay for every lie they'd told, every dollar they'd stolen, every year of my life they'd traded away for their own profit. I had $25,000, a laptop full of illegal knowledge, and nothing left to lose. That made me more dangerous than anyone realized, including myself. The game was about to change, and this time, I was going to be the one making the rules. I woke up the next morning with a plan forming in my mind, sharp and clear, like the desert air outside my hotel window. I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could make sure it stopped happening to other people. And I could make my family pay for what they'd done, not just to me, but to everyone whose lives they'd helped destroy. The first thing I needed was more information. Not just the financial records and public documents I'd been analyzing, but real intelligence about how their operation worked, who was involved, and where they kept their money. That meant getting close to them, close enough to observe and gather evidence without being recognized. Sarah Chen could do that. Sarah Chen was a business consultant who specialized in helping small companies improve their financial systems. She'd recently moved to Phoenix from Denver and was looking for new clients, particularly in the construction and property management sectors. She was exactly the kind of person who might legitimately approach Robert Cortez about his struggling business. I spent the morning creating a complete professional profile for Sarah Chen. Website, business cards, references from fictional clients in Denver who would never be contacted anyway. I even created a small portfolio of case studies showing how Sarah had helped other construction companies streamline their operations and improve their cash flow. Everything was designed to make Robert Cortez want to hire her, to invite her into his business so she could see how it really operated. The construction office was in a strip mall on the outskirts of Phoenix, squeezed between a check-cashing place and a store that sold discount furniture. The sign outside said, "Cortez Construction, quality work at fair prices." But the paint was faded and one of the letters had fallen off. It looked exactly like the kind of struggling business that would be desperate enough to hire a consultant they couldn't afford. I parked across the street and watched the building for 2 hours, learning the rhythm of the place. A few men in work clothes came and went, driving pickup trucks loaded with tools and lumber. A woman who might have been a secretary arrived at 9 and left for lunch at noon. But I didn't see my father, and I began to wonder if he was even still involved in the day-to-day operations. Around 2 in the afternoon, a black Mercedes pulled up in front of the office. The man who got out was older, heavier, grayer than the father I remembered, but it was definitely Robert Cortez. He moved slowly, like someone carrying more weight than just his own body, and when he unlocked the office door, his hands shook slightly. I waited until he'd been inside for 30 minutes, then walked across the street and entered the office. A bell above the door announced my arrival, and the woman at the front desk looked up from her computer with a practiced smile. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," I said, extending my hand and putting on my best professional manner. "I'm Sarah Chen. I'm a business consultant specializing in construction and contracting companies. I just moved here from Denver, and I'm looking to build a client base in the Phoenix area. I was hoping to speak with Mr. Cortez about how I might be able to help his business." The woman, whose nameplate identified her as Gloria, looked uncertain. "Well, Mr. Cortez is in, but he doesn't usually take meetings without an appointment." "I understand completely," I said. "I don't want to interrupt his work. Maybe I could just leave my card and some information about my services. If he's interested, he could call me when it's convenient." But before Gloria could respond, a voice called out from the back office. "Gloria, who's out there?" "A business consultant, Mr. Cortez. She's looking for new clients." There was a pause, then footsteps, and suddenly my father was standing in the doorway looking at me. For a moment, I thought he might recognize something familiar in my face, but his expression remained politely curious, nothing more. 8 years and a different hair color and the confidence of Sarah Chen's professional persona had changed me, enough that I was just another stranger to him. "Sarah Chen," I said again, offering my hand. "I help construction companies optimize their operations and improve their cash flow. I know that's probably not something you're thinking about right now, but I'd love to leave you some information about my services." Robert Cortez shook my hand, and I felt nothing. No warmth, no recognition, no connection to the man who'd taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me with my math homework and cried when I disappeared into witness protection. He was just another potential mark now, another criminal I needed to investigate. "Cash flow is always an issue in this business," he said, his voice tired. "Come on back to my office. Let's talk." The back office was small and cluttered, with stacks of invoices covering every surface, and a computer that looked like it was older than Sarah Chen was supposed to be. My father gestured to a chair across from his desk and settled heavily into his own seat. "So what exactly do you do, Miss Chen?" I launched into Sarah's prepared presentation, explaining how she helped construction companies manage their finances more efficiently, how she could identify waste and inefficiency, how she specialized in helping businesses navigate complex regulatory requirements. All of it was true, in the sense that Sarah Chen could actually do these things if she needed to. I'd spent enough time researching the construction industry to speak knowledgeably about the challenges facing small contractors. My father listened with growing interest, asking questions about my experience and methods. He seemed particularly interested when I mentioned that I'd worked with companies that had multiple revenue streams, businesses that did more than just construction. "That's exactly what we need," he said, leaning forward. "We do construction, property management, some consulting work. It's getting harder to keep track of everything, make sure all the paperwork is handled correctly." "I specialize in complex business structures," I said. "Companies that have multiple entities, different revenue sources, partnerships with other organizations. The key is making sure everything is properly documented and compliant with all applicable regulations." Something flickered in his eyes when I mentioned compliance and regulations. "How do you handle situations where the business relationships are, let's say, informal? Not everything is always perfectly documented in this industry." I smiled, the way Sarah Chen would smile when a potential client hinted at the kind of gray area work that commanded premium fees. "I understand that construction often involves handshake deals and cash transactions. My job isn't to judge how you run your business. It's to help you run it more efficiently. Everything I do is completely confidential." That was the magic phrase. My father relaxed visibly, and for the next hour, he told me more about his business than he probably should have. Not everything, not the really illegal stuff, but enough to confirm what I'd already suspected. The construction company was barely breaking even, but it provided cover for other activities. Property management that involved more than just collecting rent, consulting work that had nothing to do with construction. "I think you could really help us," he said finally. "When could you start?" "I'm available immediately," I said. "I'd need to do a complete assessment first, review all your financial records, understand how your various business relationships work. Then I can make recommendations for improvements." "How long would that take?" "Depends on how complex your operation is. Probably 2 to 3 weeks for the initial assessment." He nodded. "And your fee?" "For a project this size, probably around $15,000 for the assessment and initial recommendations. If you decide to implement my suggestions, we can discuss an ongoing consulting arrangement." It was more than he wanted to pay. I could see that in his face. But it was also exactly the kind of legitimate business expense that could help explain where his money was really coming from. A consulting fee to improve business operations, paid to a licensed professional with proper credentials. It was the kind of thing that looked good on paper when accountants or tax authorities asked questions. "Let me think about it," he said. "Can I call you tomorrow?" Of course, I said, handing him Sarah Chen's business card. I'm staying at the Phoenician while I'm getting established here, so you can reach me anytime. The Phoenician was one of the most expensive hotels in Scottsdale, the kind of place that suggested Sarah Chen was successful enough to afford luxury accommodations. It was also the kind of detail that would make my father more likely to trust her, because wealthy consultants were less likely to be undercover law enforcement. He walked me to the front door, shaking my hand again as I left. I'll call you tomorrow, Miss Chen. I think this could be exactly what we need. I drove back to my actual hotel, a much more modest place that fit my real budget, and spent the evening analyzing what I'd learned. My father was definitely involved in illegal activities, and he was looking for ways to legitimize his money and hide his tracks. He was also desperate enough to consider hiring an expensive consultant, which suggested that his operation was successful enough to generate serious cash, but sloppy enough to need professional help. More importantly, he was lonely. The man I'd just spent an hour with wasn't the confident father I remembered from my childhood. He was tired, stressed, probably scared. He was operating in a world where mistakes could be fatal, working with people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate him if he became a liability. That kind of pressure changed people, made them vulnerable in ways they didn't always recognize. Sarah Chen could exploit that vulnerability. She could become someone he trusted, someone he confided in, someone who could get close enough to his operation to gather the evidence that would bring down not just him, but everyone he worked with. The phone rang at 8 the next morning. Robert Cortez, ready to hire Sarah Chen as his business consultant. I talked it over with my partners, he said, and we'd like to move forward. When can you start the assessment? I can be there this afternoon, I said. I'll need access to all your financial records, bank statements, contracts, tax returns, everything. The more complete the picture I have, the better I can help you. Some of our records are kept off-site, he said carefully. It might take a day or two to gather everything. That's fine. I can start with whatever you have available and work on the rest as you provide it. We arranged for me to come in that afternoon to begin the assessment. I spent the morning preparing, making sure I had everything Sarah Chen would need to conduct a legitimate business analysis. Laptop, financial software, templates for the reports I'd eventually have to produce. I even bought a briefcase and some professional-looking file folders. Anything that would make me look like the kind of consultant worth $15,000. The construction office was busier in the afternoon, with several workers coming and going and phone calls that Robert took in his office with the door closed. I set up at a table in the main room where I could hear parts of his conversations, while pretending to focus on the financial documents Gloria had provided. Most of the legitimate construction work seemed to involve small residential projects, room additions, and kitchen remodels that brought in just enough money to keep the business license current and maintain the appearance of a real company. But there were other expenses that didn't fit the pattern, payments to suppliers who didn't seem to supply anything, consultation fees to companies that didn't appear to exist. "Miss Chen," my father called from his office, "could you come in here for a minute?" I gathered my notepad and walked into his office, where he was standing by the window looking out at the parking lot. He seemed nervous, more agitated than he'd been during our first meeting. "I just got off the phone with one of my business partners," he said. "There's been a development in one of our projects, something that might affect how we structure the consulting arrangement." "What kind of development?" He turned away from the window and looked at me directly. "Tell me something, Miss Chen. In your experience, how do consultants handle situations where they learn information that might be sensitive? Information that could be misunderstood by people who don't understand how business really works?" It was a test, I realized. Someone had made him paranoid, possibly warned him about being too trusting with outsiders. I needed to give him an answer that would reassure him without committing myself to anything illegal. "Confidentiality is the foundation of my business," I said. My clients trust me with their most sensitive information because they know I understand the difference between business reality and regulatory idealism. My job is to help you succeed, not to judge your methods or report your activities to anyone else. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. Good, because the project I mentioned, it involves some relationships that need to be handled carefully, people who value their privacy, who don't like unnecessary attention. I understand completely, I said. In my experience, the most successful businesses are often the ones that maintain strategic partnerships with organizations that prefer to keep a low profile. That was apparently the right answer, because he relaxed again. I'm going to introduce you to some of my partners tomorrow. They're the ones who really need help with the financial side of things. The construction business is just one part of a larger operation. I'd be happy to expand the scope of my assessment, I said. Complex business structures are actually my specialty. These partners, they're very particular about who they work with, very careful about security. When? You meet them tomorrow. Don't mention our conversation today. Let them explain their needs in their own way. Of course. And Miss Chen? These are people who don't tolerate mistakes or indiscretion. If you're not completely committed to confidentiality, if you have any reservations about working with unconventional business models, you should tell me now. I met his eyes directly. Mr. Cortez, I've worked with all kinds of businesses in all kinds of situations. I don't ask unnecessary questions, I don't make moral judgments, and I don't repeat confidential information to anyone. My only interest is in helping my clients achieve their financial goals. He smiled for the first time since I'd met him. I think you're going to fit in just fine, Miss Chen. The meeting was set for the next evening at a restaurant in North Phoenix, an upscale place that probably cost more for one meal than most people spent on groceries in a month. I spent the day researching the location, learning the layout, identifying exits and sightlines and potential problems. If this was a trap, if someone had recognized me despite my new identity, I needed to be ready to run. But it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like an opportunity, a chance to get deeper into the organization that had destroyed my life and killed innocent people for 8 years. A chance to gather the evidence that could finally bring them down. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early, dressed in Sarah Chen's most professional outfit, carrying a briefcase full of legitimate business documents and a digital recorder hidden in my purse. The hostess seated me at a table near the back of the restaurant, with a clear view of the entrance and easy access to both the front door and the emergency exit near the kitchen. My father arrived exactly on time, accompanied by 2 men I didn't recognize. One was tall and lean with silver hair and expensive clothes, the kind of person who commanded attention without trying. The other was younger, maybe 40, with the build of someone who worked out regularly and the alertness of someone who expected trouble. But it was the third person who made my blood run cold. A woman, mid-50s, with dark hair and sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. I knew that face, had seen it in nightmares for 8 years. She was one of the people who'd been in the warehouse that night, one of the people who'd watched while a man was murdered in front of me. She was also, apparently, one of my father's business partners. Miss Chen, my father said as they approached the table, I'd like you to meet some of the people I work with. This is Elena Valdez, Marcus Webb, and Tony Restrepo. Elena Valdez. The name hit me like a physical blow, though I managed to keep my expression neutral. This wasn't just any member of the criminal organization I'd been hiding from. This was family, probably the daughter or niece of the man whose operation I'd witnessed, the one who'd been giving orders that night in the warehouse. It's a pleasure to meet you, I said, standing to shake hands with each of them. Elena's grip was firm and cold, her eyes studying my face with an intensity that made me wonder if she sensed something familiar. Robert tells us you're a business consultant, she said as we all sat down, that you specialize in complex financial structures. That's right. I help organizations optimize their operations and ensure compliance with applicable regulations. And what kind of organizations have you worked with in the past? It was another test, more sophisticated than my father's clumsy attempts at feeling me out. Elena Valdez was intelligent, experienced, probably responsible for vetting everyone who came into contact with their operation. I needed to give her answers that would satisfy her without providing information that could be traced back to Sarah Chen's fictional background. I've worked with construction companies, property management firms, import-export businesses, consulting, organizations, any business that has multiple revenue streams or complex partnership arrangements. Import-export is interesting, Marcus Webb said. What kind of products? Various things. Electronics, textiles, agricultural products. The specific products matter less than the financial structures that support the business. And you're comfortable with businesses that operate across multiple jurisdictions? International operations can be challenging from a regulatory perspective. I have experience with international business structures, I said carefully. Though, obviously, the specific requirements vary depending on the countries involved and the nature of the business. Elena leaned forward slightly. What about businesses that deal primarily in cash? Industries where traditional banking relationships can be complicated? Cash-heavy businesses have their own challenges, I acknowledged. But there are established methods for managing cash flow and maintaining proper documentation. The key is understanding the specific requirements of your industry and your regulatory environment. And you don't have any philosophical objections to working with businesses that operate outside the traditional corporate model? I met her eyes directly. I believe in helping my clients achieve their goals within the parameters they set. I'm not here to judge business models or make moral decisions. I'm here to provide professional financial services. That seemed to be the answer she was looking for. The tension around the table eased slightly, and the conversation shifted to more specific questions about my methods and experience. They wanted to know about my background, my references, my approach to confidentiality. All questions that Sarah Chen was prepared to answer, all details that had been carefully constructed to withstand scrutiny. Over the course of 2 hours, they told me more about their operation than I'd dared hope for. Not everything, not the details that would incriminate them in court, but enough to understand how the business worked and where my family fit into it. They were laundering money for multiple criminal organizations, not just the Valdez family, but other groups that needed to move cash without attracting attention. The construction company was one of several legitimate businesses they used as fronts, along with restaurants, car dealerships, and real estate agencies. My father's role was relatively small, managing one piece of the operation, but he was completely dependent on them for his income, and therefore completely under their control. My mother's house cleaning service had been part of the intelligence gathering operation, identifying wealthy targets for burglary and kidnapping. Maria's identity theft work provided the false documentation needed to open bank accounts and establish shell companies. Even Danny's college education was part of the plan, preparing him to take over more sophisticated aspects of the operation when he graduated. They'd turned my entire family into a criminal enterprise, and they'd done it gradually, starting with small favors and minor infractions, then escalating until there was no way out. By the time the Valdez family approached them about their missing daughter, they were already so deeply involved that betraying me felt like just another business transaction. So, Elena said as the evening wound down, are you interested in expanding your consulting practice to include our organization? Very much so, I said. This is exactly the kind of complex operation where I can add the most value. Excellent. We'll start with a limited engagement, see how you handle the work and how well you fit with our culture. Robert will provide you with the initial documentation tomorrow. I appreciate the opportunity. One more thing, Miss Chen. Elena's voice took on a colder tone. Our organization values loyalty above all else. People who work with us become part of our family, and family members protect each other. They also understand that betraying the family has serious consequences. I understand completely. Good. Because we've had problems in the past with people who didn't appreciate the importance of discretion, people who thought they could take our money and then share our business with others. Those people discovered that our organization has a very long memory and very effective methods for dealing with disloyalty. The threat was clear, delivered with the kind of casual menace that suggested she'd made good on similar promises many times before. But instead of frightening me, it filled me with a cold rage that I had to work to conceal. This woman had probably been involved in killing the witnesses who'd tried to testify against her family. She'd definitely been involved in the decision to hunt me for 8 years, to destroy my life and force me into hiding. And now she was threatening me again, not knowing that I was the same person she'd been hunting all along. "I appreciate your directness," I said. "Loyalty is the foundation of any successful business relationship." We parted company in the restaurant parking lot, with promises to begin work the following week. I watched them drive away in separate cars, Elena in a black BMW, Marcus in a silver Porsche, Tony in a pickup truck that probably cost more than most people's houses. My father rode with Elena, and I wondered what they were discussing as they disappeared into the Phoenix traffic. I sat in my rental car for a long time after they left, processing what I'd learned and planning my next moves. I was inside their organization now, trusted enough to be given access to their financial records and operations. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, the opportunity to gather evidence and understand how they worked. But it was also more dangerous than I'd anticipated. Elena Valdez wasn't just another criminal I could outsmart and manipulate. She was intelligent, paranoid, and absolutely ruthless. If she discovered who I really was, she wouldn't just kill me. She'd make an example of me, the kind of example that would discourage other people from trying to deceive her. And my family was completely under her control. They weren't just working with her, they were trapped by her, caught in a web of illegal activities that made it impossible for them to escape even if they wanted to, which they probably didn't, because they were making more money as criminals than they'd ever made as honest people. But that also meant that bringing down Elena's organization would destroy my family too. When the evidence I gathered was eventually turned over to law enforcement, Robert and Linda and Maria and Danny Cortez would all be arrested, tried, and probably sent to prison for years. The people who'd betrayed me, who'd sold me out for money, who'd helped murderers stay free would finally face justice. The thought should have satisfied me, but instead it just made me feel empty. They weren't the family I'd missed for 8 years, the people I'd loved and dreamed about reuniting with someday. They were strangers who happened to share my DNA, criminals who'd chosen money over their own daughter. Destroying them would be justice, but it wouldn't bring back the family I'd lost. Still, it was the right thing to do. Elena Valdez and her organization had killed innocent people, corrupted law enforcement, and terrorized witnesses into silence. They were still doing it, still destroying lives and making millions from other people's suffering. If I could gather enough evidence to bring them down, if I could finally give prosecutors the ammunition they needed to put these people away forever, then maybe the last 8 years of running and hiding in fear would mean something. I drove back to my hotel through the empty Phoenix streets, past strip malls and fast food restaurants and apartment complexes where normal people lived normal lives. People who didn't have to worry about being hunted by killers or betrayed by their families or threatened by crime bosses in expensive restaurants. I envied them, but I also knew I could never be one of them again. Even if I walked away right now, even if I disappeared permanently as Sarah Chen, I'd always know what I'd learned tonight. I'd always know that Elena Valdez was still out there, still killing people, still profiting from violence and corruption. I'd know that my family was helping her do it, that they were actively participating in the same organization that had destroyed my life. Knowledge like that was a burden you couldn't put down. Once you knew the truth about how the world really worked, about how much evil ordinary people were capable of when the price was right. You couldn't unknow it. You could only decide what to do with that knowledge. I was going to use it to destroy them all. Every single person who'd profited from my suffering. Every criminal who'd escaped justice because witnesses were too afraid to testify. Every corrupt official who'd looked the other way when money changed hands. I was going to gather evidence against all of them, and then I was going to watch their world burn, starting with my own family. Family is everything to us, Linda continued, swirling her wine glass. We believe that blood ties create obligations that go beyond normal business relationships. When someone becomes part of our family, we expect absolute loyalty in return for absolute protection. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. This woman who was talking about family loyalty had helped arrange for her own daughter to be hunted and killed. But I nodded as if I understood and agreed, playing the role of Sarah Chen, who was impressed by their family values. That's a beautiful philosophy, I said. Too many businesses treat their relationships as purely transactional. It's refreshing to work with people who understand that trust and loyalty are the foundation of long-term success. Exactly. Linda leaned forward, her voice dropping. Which is why I want to ask you about something Robert mentioned. He said you have experience with organizations that operate internationally, that deal with complex regulatory environments. I do. Global businesses face unique challenges that domestic companies never encounter. What about organizations that move assets across borders, not necessarily through traditional banking channels, but through more creative methods? She was probing, trying to understand how much I really knew about money laundering and international financial crimes. Sarah Chen needed to demonstrate knowledge without appearing too knowledgeable, sophisticated enough to be useful, but not so sophisticated that she seemed like law enforcement. Asset protection is a specialized field, I said carefully. Wealthy individuals and successful businesses often need to diversify their holdings across multiple jurisdictions for tax optimization and risk management purposes. There are established methods for moving assets efficiently while maintaining compliance with applicable regulations. And if those regulations were, let's say, overly restrictive, if they prevented legitimate business activities, I believe in helping my clients achieve their goals within whatever parameters they feel comfortable with. My job is to provide options and expertise, not to make moral judgments about business decisions. That seemed to satisfy her. We spent the rest of dinner discussing my background and experience, with Linda asking increasingly specific questions about my methods and philosophy. She wanted to know how I handled confidential information, how I dealt with clients who had unusual security requirements, how I managed situations where business activities might be misunderstood by outsiders. All questions that Sarah Chen was prepared to answer, all designed to build trust and demonstrate that I could be valuable to their organization. But underneath the professional conversation, I was studying the woman who had once been my mother, trying to understand how she'd become someone who could sacrifice her own daughter for money. The transformation wasn't complete, I realized. There were moments when her mask slipped, when I caught glimpses of the woman I remembered from childhood. When the waiter brought our dessert, she smiled with genuine warmth. When she talked about Danny's success in college, her pride was real and maternal. She wasn't a sociopath who felt nothing for her family. She was someone who'd made terrible choices and then rationalized them until they felt acceptable. I have a confession to make, she said as we finished our meal. When Robert first mentioned hiring a consultant, I was skeptical. We've been burned before by people who promised to help but ended up causing problems. What kind of problems? Oh, you know how it is. People who seemed trustworthy at first, but turned out to have their own agendas. People who took our money and then tried to use what they'd learned against us. Another warning, delivered more subtly than Elena's direct threats, but no less, clear in its implications. They'd killed people who'd betrayed them before, and they would kill me too if they decided I was a threat. That's terrible, I said. Professional confidentiality is sacred in my line of work. I can't imagine violating a client's trust like that. I'm glad to hear you say that, because Elena has plans for you that go beyond just helping Robert's construction business. If you prove yourself with this initial project, there could be opportunities to work with our other partners, to become part of something much larger and more profitable. I'd welcome that opportunity. Good, because tomorrow you're going to meet some of those partners, people who have very specific needs and very high standards. If you can help them the way you've helped Robert, you'll find that our organization rewards loyalty very generously. The meeting was set for the next evening at a private club in Scottsdale, the kind of place that didn't advertise and didn't welcome walk-in customers. Linda gave me the address and a membership card that would get me past the security desk, along with instructions about dress code and protocols. "One more thing," she said as we prepared to leave. "The people you'll be meeting tomorrow, they're very concerned about security. They'll want to verify your background, make sure you are who you claim to be. I hope that won't be a problem." My blood turned cold, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course not. Due diligence is important in any business relationship. Excellent. I'll see you tomorrow night then. I drove back to my hotel in a state of controlled panic, my mind racing through the implications of what Linda had told me. They were going to verify Sarah Chen's background, which meant they would discover that she was a completely fabricated identity. The documents Document Ghost had provided were sophisticated enough to fool casual inspection, but they wouldn't survive the kind of deep investigation that Elena's organization was capable of conducting. I had maybe 24 hours before they discovered that Sarah Chen didn't exist, which meant I had 24 hours to gather enough evidence to justify the risks I'd taken. The financial documents I'd reviewed that morning were useful, but they weren't enough to bring down an organization this size and sophisticated. I needed something bigger, something that would implicate Elena personally and demonstrate the scope of their criminal activities. The private club was my best opportunity. If Elena was introducing me to other partners, other pieces of their operation, I might be able to identify targets for law enforcement investigation. I might even be able to record conversations that would provide direct evidence of criminal planning and coordination. But I also needed an exit strategy, a way to escape when they discovered who I really was, because they would discover it, probably sooner than I was prepared for. Sarah Chen's false identity might buy me another day, or two, but it wouldn't protect me indefinitely. I spent that night preparing for what might be my last operation. I transferred most of Sarah Chen's money to an untraceable account, keeping only enough cash to maintain my cover for another day. I created backup identities and escape routes, identifying airports and bus stations where I could disappear if everything went wrong. I even wrote a letter explaining everything I'd learned, with instructions to deliver it to federal authorities if I failed to check in within 72 hours. The private club was even more exclusive than I'd expected, occupying the top floor of a downtown office building with security that rivaled government facilities. The elevator required a key card, and there were guards at multiple checkpoints, who scrutinized my identification and compared my face to photos they had on file. But Sarah Chen's membership card worked perfectly, and I was eventually escorted to a private dining room where Elena and 5 other people were waiting. I recognized 2 of them from news reports and FBI wanted posters, high-level criminals, who'd been fugitives for years. The others were new to me, but their expensive clothes and confident manner suggested they were equally important in the criminal hierarchy. "Sarah," Elena said, standing to greet me, "I'd like you to meet some of our business partners, people who share our commitment to innovation and efficiency in financial management." The introductions were made with first names only, no business cards or formal titles. But over the course of the evening, I learned enough about each person to understand their role in the organization. Carlos ran shipping operations that moved drugs and weapons through legitimate import-export businesses. Victoria managed a network of casinos and entertainment venues that laundered money for dozens of criminal groups. Michael oversaw the technology side of their operations, using sophisticated computer systems to track transactions and avoid detection by law enforcement. They were all interested in Sarah Chen's expertise, particularly her supposed experience with international asset protection and regulatory compliance. Each of them had specific problems they wanted help solving, complex financial puzzles that required creative solutions and absolute discretion. The challenge, Carlos explained, is moving large amounts of cash from our domestic operations to investment opportunities in South America and Eastern Europe. Traditional banking channels are too heavily monitored, but alternative methods are often unreliable or expensive. What kind of volumes are we talking about? I asked. Typically 50 to 100 million per quarter, sometimes more during busy seasons. The numbers were staggering, representing more money than I'd ever imagined, but I maintained Sarah Chen's professional composure, asking follow-up questions about timelines and security requirements as if discussing the transfer of hundreds of millions in drug money was perfectly normal. Victoria's problem was different, but equally complex. Her casinos were generating huge profits, but the money needed to be legitimized before it could be invested in other ventures. She needed sophisticated laundering systems that could handle large volumes without triggering regulatory attention. "We've been using real estate transactions," she said, "but the market is becoming too volatile. We need diversification, multiple channels that can operate independently if one gets compromised." Michael's concerns were more technical. He was worried about cybersecurity, about law enforcement agencies developing new tools for tracking digital transactions and penetrating encrypted communications. He wanted recommendations for protecting their data and maintaining operational security in an increasingly connected world. I took detailed notes on everything they told me, asking questions that demonstrated Sarah Chen's expertise while gathering intelligence that could eventually be used against them. Each problem they described was evidence of large-scale criminal activity, specific details that prosecutors could use to build cases and secure convictions. But I also recorded everything on a device hidden in my purse, a sophisticated recorder. That document Ghost had included with Sarah Chen's identity package. The audio quality wouldn't be perfect, but it would be good enough to capture incriminating statements and identify voices that could later be matched to known criminals. "The beauty of working with Elena's organization," Victoria said at one point, "is the integration. We're not just independent operators doing business together. We're a family, sharing resources and expertise and covering each other's vulnerabilities." "How long has this partnership been operating?" I asked. "Elena's been building these relationships for over 15 years, Carlos said. Starting small, proving herself with minor operations, gradually expanding until she became one of the most trusted coordinators in North America. Coordination is the key," Elena added. "Individual criminal enterprises are vulnerable to law enforcement pressure. But when you integrate multiple operations, when you create mutual dependencies and shared resources, you become much stronger. Law enforcement can't target one piece without affecting all the others. Plus," Michael said, "we have advantages that traditional organized crime families never had. We're not bound by ethnic or geographic limitations. We recruit the best people regardless of their background, and we operate across international borders without the territorial disputes that cripple other organizations." They were describing a criminal empire that was more sophisticated and dangerous than anything I'd imagined. Not a traditional mafia family or drug cartel, but a modern, corporate structure that applied business principles to illegal activities. They had diversified revenue streams, professional management systems, and global operations that made them nearly impossible for law enforcement to dismantle. And my family was part of it, contributing their skills and resources to an organization that had killed hundreds of people and destroyed thousands of lives over the past 15 years. "What about opposition?" I asked. "Law enforcement pressure, competing organizations, Disloyal employees? How do you handle internal security? Elena's expression darkened. We've learned from the mistakes of previous generations. Traditional criminal organizations were vulnerable because they tolerated weakness and disloyalty. We don't make those mistakes. What do you mean? We mean that betrayal has consequences, Victoria said. People who work with us understand that our organization's survival depends on absolute loyalty. Anyone who threatens that survival is eliminated quickly and permanently. We've had to make examples of people who thought they could take our money and then turn against us, Carlos added. Witnesses who tried to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. Law enforcement officers who tried to infiltrate our operations. Business partners who got greedy and decided to work with our competitors. The Cortez family understands this, Elena said, looking directly at me. They've seen what happens to people who betray us, and they've chosen loyalty over the alternatives. It's one of the reasons we've been so successful working with them. The threat was clear, but there was something else in Elena's voice, something that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. I maintained my professional composure, but inside, I was calculating distances to exits and planning escape routes. Family loyalty is admirable, I said. It creates the kind of trust that's essential for long-term business relationships. Exactly. Which brings me to an interesting story, Elena said, settling back in her chair. About 15 years ago, we had a problem with a witness who saw something she shouldn't have seen. A teenage girl who witnessed one of our enforcement actions and decided to cooperate with federal authorities. My heart stopped, but I forced myself to remain still and attentive, as if I was listening to a business anecdote that had no personal relevance. The girl disappeared into witness protection, and for years we couldn't find her. She was very well hidden, very careful about maintaining her new identity. But we're patient people, and we have resources that most organizations don't. Eventually, we found her family, and we discovered something interesting about them. They weren't the grieving relatives we'd expected. They were practical people who understood that their daughter was probably never coming back, that she'd chosen law enforcement over family loyalty. So we offered them a business proposition. Instead of mourning their lost daughter, they could profit from her disappearance. They could help us locate her, help us resolve our security problem, and become valuable partners in our organization. It took time to convince them, of course. They had emotional attachments that needed to be overcome. But eventually they realized that business relationships are more reliable than family relationships. Their daughter had abandoned them for federal protection, but we offered them financial security and genuine partnership. Elena paused, studying my face for any reaction. I kept my expression neutral, professional, as if I was listening to a case study about effective negotiation strategies. The beautiful thing about that situation, she continued, was how it demonstrated the power of properly aligned incentives. Instead of being our enemies, the family became our allies. Instead of hiding their daughter, they helped us find her. Instead of protecting her, they helped us eliminate her. That's very clever, I said, my voice steady despite the rage and terror fighting for control inside my chest. Converting enemies into assets is much more efficient than simply eliminating them. Precisely. And it's a lesson we apply in many situations. People who might seem like threats can often become our most valuable partners if we approach them correctly. Elena signaled to one of the security guards, who stepped forward and placed a folder on the table in front of me. Which brings us to you, Sarah Chen. Or should I say, Jessica Martinez? Or perhaps you prefer your original name, Jessie Cortez? The folder contained photographs of me at every stage of my life. As a teenager in Riverside, as Jessica Martinez in Portland, as Sarah Chen in Phoenix. They'd been watching me for years, documenting my activities, waiting for the right moment to reveal what they knew. Your parents were very helpful in setting up this meeting, Elena continued. They provided personal details about their daughter that helped us confirm your identity. Mannerisms, preferences, behavioral patterns that couldn't be faked or hidden behind a false identity. Linda was particularly observant during your dinner yesterday. She noticed little things that reminded her of the daughter she'd lost 8 years ago. The way you hold your fork, the way you tilt your head when you're thinking, the way you unconsciously touch your left ear when you're nervous. Just like you're doing right now. I forced my hand away from my ear, but it was too late. The gesture had confirmed what they already knew. The question now, Elena said, is what we do with you. We could eliminate you, of course. You've been a security problem for 15 years, and removing you would certainly resolve that issue permanently. But that would be wasteful. You've demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness over the past week, creating a false identity, infiltrating our organization, gathering intelligence about our operations. Those are valuable skills that could benefit us if properly directed. So we're prepared to offer you the same choice we offered your family. You can continue being our enemy and face the consequences, or you can become our partner and share in our success. I looked around the room at the faces watching me, criminals who'd built an empire on violence and corruption, people who'd destroyed countless lives in pursuit of profit. My own family had joined them willingly, had helped them hunt me for money, and status, and the illusion of security. What kind of partnership are you talking about? I asked. You help us expand our operations into new territories and markets. Your experience with witness protection gives you insights into law enforcement procedures that would be invaluable for our security planning. Your skills with false identities and financial systems could help us develop new methods for avoiding detection. And in return? Financial compensation that would make Sarah Chen's consulting fees look like pocket change. Protection from law enforcement that goes far beyond anything the federal government could provide. And most importantly, reunion with your family. They've missed you terribly over the years, you know. They'd be delighted to have their daughter back. It was tempting, in a sick way. After 8 years of isolation and fear, the idea of being reunited with my family was powerfully appealing. Even knowing what they'd become, even understanding that they'd betrayed me, part of me still wanted to believe that we could be a family. Again. But I also knew it was impossible. These people had murdered witnesses, corrupted officials, and destroyed lives for 15 years. They would never trust me enough to let me live peacefully, even if I agreed to work with them. And I could. Never trust them enough to believe their promises, even if I wanted to. That's a generous offer, I said, but I need time to think about it. This is a big decision, and I want to make sure I understand all the implications. Elena smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Of course, take all the time you need. Your hotel room has been upgraded to a suite with better security. There are guards in the lobby and on your floor. For your protection, of course. We wouldn't want anything to happen to you while you're making such an important decision. I was a prisoner, confined to a luxury hotel room while they waited for my answer. But they'd made a mistake by giving me time to think and plan. They assumed that isolation and pressure would make me more likely to accept their offer, but they'd underestimated my capacity for patience and planning. I had the audio recordings of their conversation, evidence that could implicate all of them in multiple felonies. I had detailed knowledge of their financial systems and operational procedures. I had documentation of their money laundering methods and international connections. Most importantly, I had something they didn't know about. A letter I'd written before coming to the private club, explaining everything I'd learned and providing instructions for law enforcement investigation. The letter was hidden in a safety deposit box that would be automatically opened if I failed to check in within 72 hours. Elena's organization had survived for 15 years by being patient and careful, by eliminating threats before they could become dangerous. But they'd never faced someone like me, someone who'd been trained by their own tactics, someone who understood their methods because she'd been running from them for 8 years. I was going to destroy them all. Not just Elena and her immediate associates, but everyone who'd profited from their organization. Everyone who'd helped them murder witnesses and corrupt officials and terrorize innocent people. Starting with my own family, the people who'd sold out their own daughter and helped kill an innocent woman in her place. The war between us had been going on for 8 years. But now, finally, I was ready to win it. The morning of my decision arrived gray and overcast, unusual weather for Phoenix that seemed to match my mood. I dressed carefully in Sarah Chen's most professional outfit, knowing it would probably be the last time I wore her identity. By tonight, Sarah Chen would be blown, Jessica Martinez would be officially dead, and Jessie Cortez would either be free or dead alongside them. Elena had arranged to meet at her personal office, a penthouse suite in a downtown building that housed several of her legitimate businesses. The security was even tighter than the private club, with multiple checkpoints and guards who seemed more military than civilian. They searched my purse, confiscated my phone, and made me walk through scanners that would detect any recording devices or weapons. But they didn't find the tiny transmitter I'd sewn into the lining of my jacket, or the backup device hidden in the heel of my shoe. Both were broadcasting on frequencies that federal agents would be monitoring, assuming my messages had reached the right people, and they'd managed to organize surveillance in time. Elena was waiting in an office that looked more like a luxury apartment than a workplace, with expensive furniture and original artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered commanding views of the city. She was dressed impeccably as always, but I could see tension around her eyes that suggested she wasn't as confident about this meeting as she wanted to appear. "Jessie," she said, standing to greet me, "I hope you've had time to think about our conversation." "I have. It's been very enlightening." "And what conclusion have you reached?" I sat down across from her desk, taking a moment to study her face before answering. This woman had been hunting me for 8 years, had murdered witnesses and corrupted officials and built a criminal empire on violence and fear. She'd destroyed my childhood, stolen my family, and forced me to live in hiding since I was 16 years old. But she'd also made a crucial mistake. She'd assumed that because she'd broken my family, because she'd isolated me and threatened me and demonstrated her power, I would eventually submit to her will. She didn't understand that some people become stronger when they're pushed to their limits, that some people choose to fight even when the odds are impossible. "I accept your offer," I said. Elena smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm pleased to hear that. You've made the smart choice. I want to discuss terms, though. If I'm going to be working with your organization, I need to understand exactly what's expected of me and what I can expect in return." "Of course. What specific concerns do you have?" "First, my family. You mentioned that part of the arrangement would involve reuniting with them. I want to make sure they're protected, that their involvement with your organization doesn't put them at unnecessary risk. Your family has been valuable partners for several years now. As long as they continue to be productive and loyal, they'll continue to enjoy our protection." "What about my role? You mentioned using my experience with witness protection to improve your security procedures. I'd like to understand how that would work in practice." Elena leaned back in her chair, studying me with renewed interest. "You'd help us identify vulnerabilities in our operations, ways that law enforcement might try to penetrate our organization or gather evidence against us. You'd also help us develop new methods for protecting our people and assets from government interference. Essentially, you want me to help you stay ahead of federal investigation." "Exactly. Your unique perspective would be invaluable for that purpose." "And what happens to people who don't prove valuable? People who can't contribute to your organization's success?" Elena's expression hardened slightly. "People who can't contribute don't typically remain associated with us for very long. Like the woman who died in my Portland apartment? That situation was regrettable but necessary. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but her death served a legitimate business purpose. Which was? Convincing the world that you were dead, eliminating the loose thread that your continued existence represented. It was actually quite elegant, allowing us to close out an old problem while creating new opportunities. I nodded, as if I found her logic reasonable, while inside I was burning with rage at her casual description of murder as elegant problem-solving. But I needed to keep her talking, needed to gather more evidence of her crimes while federal agents hopefully closed in on the building. "I'm curious about something," I said. "How did you first identify my family as potential assets? What made you think they could be turned against me?" Elena smiled, genuinely pleased by the question. "Research and psychology. We spent years studying your family, understanding their financial pressures and emotional vulnerabilities. We knew that Robert's business was failing, that Linda was struggling with depression about your disappearance, that your siblings were angry about being abandoned by their sister. We also knew that people can rationalize almost anything if the incentives are properly aligned. Your family didn't want to betray you initially, but we made the alternative seem worse than cooperation. We offered them financial security and purpose at a time when they felt hopeless and forgotten. The key was patience. We didn't ask them to help us find you immediately. We started with small favors, minor criminal activities that seemed harmless. By the time we asked them to participate in something serious, they were already compromised and couldn't refuse without destroying themselves. It's actually a model we use frequently for recruitment. Identify people with vulnerabilities, offer them solutions that come with strings attached, then gradually increase their level of involvement until they're completely dependent on us, like a cult. Like a successful business, Elena corrected. We provide value to our partners, and they provide value to us. Everyone benefits as long as everyone remains loyal. And what happens when someone stops being loyal? Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at it, and her expression immediately changed from confident to concerned. "That's an interesting question," she said, standing up from her desk, "because I think we're about to find out." Through the windows, I could see black SUVs pulling up to the building, federal agents in tactical gear taking positions around the entrances. Elena's security systems were flashing warnings on her computer screen, indicating that the building was being surrounded. "It seems you've been busy during your stay with us," Elena said, her voice calm despite the chaos erupting around her building. "More busy than we realized." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." Elena walked to a wall safe behind her desk, entering a complex code that unlocked multiple security mechanisms. "The question now is whether you've simply been gathering intelligence or whether you've actually managed to transmit anything useful to your federal friends." She pulled a pistol from the safe, checking the magazine before turning back to face me. "Either way, you've forced us to accelerate our timeline significantly." "What timeline?" "The one where we disappear completely and start over somewhere else." "We've been preparing for this possibility for years, maintaining assets and identities in countries that don't have extradition treaties with the United States. Your family, unfortunately, won't be joining us for that relocation. They've served their purpose, and they've become a liability. Loose ends that need to be tied up before we can move forward." My blood turned cold. "You're going to kill them." "I'm going to eliminate security risks, just like I'm going to eliminate you." "It's nothing personal, just business necessity." Elena pressed a button on her desk that activated a communication system. "Marcus, initiate Protocol 7 immediately. All assets in Phoenix, terminate and dispose, no exceptions." Protocol 7 was probably their contingency plan for situations exactly like this one. A coordinated elimination of everyone who could provide evidence against the organization. My family, despite years of loyal service, were apparently expendable when their continued existence threatened Elena's escape. "You don't have to do this," I said, trying to buy time while federal agents worked their way through the building's security systems. "My family doesn't know enough to hurt you. They were just small players in your organization. Small players who could identify major players under interrogation, Elena replied. People who could provide details about our operations, our methods, our international connections. We can't afford to leave witnesses behind when we relocate. Besides, they chose their path when they agreed to work with us. They knew the risks, even if they didn't want to acknowledge them. Actions have consequences in this business. The sound of gunfire echoed from somewhere lower in the building, probably Elena's security team engaging with federal agents who were fighting their way upstairs. Elena seemed unconcerned by the violence, as if armed confrontations in her place of business were routine occurrences. You know, she said conversationally, I'm actually impressed by what you've accomplished. Creating a false identity, penetrating our organization, gathering intelligence, coordinating with federal agents. It's exactly the kind of resourcefulness we were hoping to recruit. Under different circumstances, you could have been an extremely valuable asset. You have skills and determination that are rare in this business. But circumstances are what they are, and you've made choices that put you on the wrong side of this conflict. So now I have to kill you, which is really quite wasteful. The gunfire was getting closer, and Elena's computer screen showed that federal agents had breached the building's main security perimeter. But they still had several floors to fight through, and Elena's people were well-armed and well-trained. How long do you think it will take them to reach us? Elena asked, almost casually. 10 minutes? 15? More than enough time to resolve our immediate problems and initiate our departure protocols. She raised the pistol, pointing it directly at my chest. Any last words? Anything you'd like me to tell your family before I have them killed? Just one thing, I said, standing up slowly from my chair. You should have checked my background more carefully. Elena frowned, confused by my apparent calm in the face of imminent death. What do you mean? I mean, Jessica Martinez wasn't just hiding in Portland for 8 years. She was learning computer systems, financial fraud, surveillance techniques, weapons training, everything she needed to eventually come back and destroy the people who'd destroyed her life. And Sarah Chen wasn't just a business consultant. She was bait, designed to get close enough to your organization to gather the evidence that federal agents needed to bring you down. But most importantly, Jessie Cortez isn't the scared 16-year-old girl who witnessed a murder 8 years ago. She's someone who's been planning this confrontation for longer than you realize, someone who's been 3 steps ahead of you from the beginning. Elena's expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you never found me. I found you. 2 years ago, when I decided to stop running and start hunting. I've been tracking your organization, learning your methods, identifying your weaknesses ever since. The private investigator who approached my family? She was working for me, not the other way around. Sarah Chen's identity wasn't created by some darknet vendor. It was created by federal agents who've been building a case against you for years. Even my family's betrayal was planned. We knew you'd approach them eventually, knew you'd try to use them against me. So we fed them information that would make them useful to you while making sure they could never actually hurt me. Elena's hand was shaking now, the pistol wavering as she tried to process what I was telling her. That's impossible. We had surveillance on you for years. We documented your entire life as Jessica Martinez. You documented what we wanted you to see, a carefully constructed facade designed to make you think you were hunting someone who was hiding, when actually you were being hunted by someone who was planning. The sound of explosions echoed from the floor below us, followed by the distinctive crack of flashbang grenades. Federal agents were close now, probably only minutes away from breaching Elena's office. You're lying, Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Then explain how federal agents knew exactly where to find evidence of your money laundering operations. Explain how they obtained recordings of your conversations with corrupt officials. Explain how they identified the locations of your safe houses and operational centers. You've been compromised for months, Elena. Every move you've made, every decision you've thought was secret, it's all been reported to federal authorities. Your entire organization is being dismantled as we speak. Elena raised the pistol again, her finger moving toward the trigger. But before she could fire, the office door exploded inward, and federal agents in tactical gear flooded into the inside room. Federal agents, drop your weapon. Elena hesitated for a moment, looking back and forth between me and the armed agents surrounding her. Then she smiled, the cold expression of someone who'd made a final decision. "See you in hell, Jessie Cortez," she said, and turned the gun toward her own head. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Elena collapsed behind her desk, blood spreading across expensive carpet, her criminal empire dying with her. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., watching as the last of Elena's associates were sentenced for their crimes. The investigation had been even more successful than we'd hoped, dismantling criminal networks across 3 countries and recovering hundreds of millions in stolen assets. My family had been arrested, tried, and convicted for their roles in the organization. Robert got 15 years for money laundering and conspiracy. Linda got 10 years for accessory to murder. Maria got 8 years for identity theft and fraud. Danny, as the youngest and least involved, got 5 years in a minimum security facility. They'd all testified against Elena's other associates in exchange for reduced sentences, providing details about operations and methods that helped prosecutors build cases against dozens of other criminals. In the end, they'd served justice better as witnesses than they ever had as criminals. I'd testified too, not as Jessie Cortez or Jessica Martinez or Sarah Chen, but as Agent Jennifer Walsh, the federal investigator who'd spent 2 years building the case against Elena's organization. The U.S. Marshals had created that identity for me when I'd first approached them about my plan for revenge, giving me the training and resources I needed to infiltrate the criminal network that had destroyed my childhood. The scared 16-year-old girl who'd witnessed a murder 8 years ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood that justice sometimes required patience and planning, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for a cause larger than yourself. I'd lost my family, my innocence, and any hope of a normal life. But I'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that evil could be defeated by people who were willing to fight it, regardless of the personal cost. After the final sentencing hearing, I walked out of the courthouse into bright sunshine and thought about what came next. Agent Jennifer Walsh would probably be transferred to another case, another group of criminals who thought they were untouchable. The work would be dangerous and difficult and lonely, but it would also be meaningful in ways that most people never experienced. I'd never be Jessie Cortez again, never be the innocent girl who'd grown up believing that families stayed together and good people were protected by just institutions. But I could be someone who protected other innocent people, someone who made sure that criminals like Elena Valdez faced consequences for their actions. I pulled out my phone and called my handler at the Marshals office. "This is Walsh," I said, when he answered. "What's the next assignment?" Because somewhere out there, another 16-year-old girl was probably witnessing something she shouldn't see, probably about to have her life destroyed by people who thought power made them untouchable. And when that happened, when she needed someone to believe her story and help her fight back, Agent Jennifer Walsh would be ready. The war against people like Elena would never really end. But at least now, I was fighting on the right side. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.